In this first of two episodes about Nolan's Odyssey and Odysseus, we will explore why we still need Odysseus and how Nolan's Odyssey makes us question the very meaning of civilization. Christopher Nolan has chosen to tell the story of the Odyssey. Predictably, the debate is on fire. Is the film faithful to Homer? Does it betray the original? But that is not the question that I would like to explore today. The Odyssey has never survived because generation after generation copied it faithfully. It has survived because it has repeatedly been reinvented across the centuries, and different ages and generations have found in Odysseus something new about what it means to be human. I believe that Nolan's contribution is a magnificent contemporary chapter in this long and profoundly human story. Hi and welcome. It's so nice to have you here. This is the first of two episodes about Nolan's Odyssey, and today we will explore two fundamental questions. How has the figure of Ulysses re-emerged in different forms across the centuries, reflecting the questions and concerns of that time? And how does Nolan's Odyssey makes us question the very meaning of civilization? And across two episodes, we will discover why Odysseus has survived for over 3,000 years and what he can tell us today about how we can navigate a more authentic, better, and happier life. Before we begin this conversation, I'd like to briefly introduce myself and explain why I decided to share this project with you. My son just told me that with this whole story about the podcast about the Odyssey, I'm basically LARPing, which apparently in their slang means pretending to be an intellectual about a trendy subject. But I assure you that there's a very genuine desire behind all of this. So, son, let me LARP in peace. And then we will travel in time through a short history of Odysseus archetype and how it has traveled throughout the centuries. And finally, we will start the analysis of Nolan's film by exploring the theme of the decline of civilization. So, hi again. My name is Giulia. I'm a language and literature and drama teacher. My academic background is in European literary cultures, mainly Italian, French, and Latin literature, as well as history and philosophy. But I also trained as an actress before becoming a teacher. I've always been fascinated in education, in communication. And over the past 2 years, podcasts have become a part of my daily life. Listening to people like Jay Shetty on Purpose or Mel Robbins introduced me to some remarkable researchers, psychologists, thinkers whose work genuinely enriched my perspective about well-being. And I thought how cool it would be to combine all this with my love for literature. In one episode, Jay Shetty revisited the sociological idea of the third place, suggesting that for many people today, podcasts are becoming a new space for reflection, a place outside work or home where we can pause, think, and reconnect with ourselves. That idea stayed with me. Then, just a few weeks ago, I returned from my very first trip to Greece, a trip to Greece that I had deeply longed for and I strongly insisted on taking. We went to the Peloponnese, where I saw some breathtaking landscapes and sunsets. We traveled to Sparta, Mycenae, and I stood in front of the so-called Mask of Agamemnon in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. During that trip, almost by chance, or perhaps not by chance at all, I started reading, I found myself reading Greek epic literature again, because next year, for the very first time, I will be teaching it to my students. And as I read, I found myself reflecting once again on the extraordinary generative power of myths. Then I came back, and as millions of people were heading to the cinemas to experience Nolan's Odyssey after months of anticipation, perhaps because I live a little bit outside the flow of contemporary life, I found out about the existence of this movie just when I returned home. And I went to the movies, and suddenly something clicked. It felt as though Odysseus, my old friend, had found me at exactly the right moment, not simply giving me the idea for a couple of episodes about Nolan's Odyssey, but awakening a much deeper desire to begin a conversation about literature, philosophy, education, psychology, and ultimately about the power that great stories have to help us understand what it means to live a deeply human life, to help us navigate the complexity of contemporary life while never losing sight of the most extraordinary part of ourselves, our humanity. For as long as I can remember, I've always been fascinated by one question: what makes a human life truly worth living? I've explored the answer in many different ways, in different phases of my life, and this online conversation is simply a new way of continuing that search with you, people that, like me, love traveling beyond the horizon. So, Nolan's Odyssey. Here in Italy, where the weight of the classical tradition is still very much alive, the movie has generated passionate criticism. Many people are discussing whether it respects Homer. Personally, as I said, this is not the debate that interests me. What fascinates me is the fact that Odysseus has been repeatedly reinvented across the century because, like Prometheus, is a powerful symbol of human condition itself, of human intelligence, curiosity, ambition, vulnerability, and the eternal search for meaning. Different generations return to Odysseus to ask him once again what it means to be human. And I believe that Nolan's Odysseus may become the most compelling Odysseus of our time, not because he replaces Homer, but because he helps us confront some defining questions of the 21st century. For example, what does it mean to be fully responsible of our choices in a postmodern, technocratic, violent world where the old sources of meaning no longer provide a single shared direction? How do we find our way when we are surrounded by countless voices, systems, narratives, constantly fighting to yell at us who we should become, what we should desire, how we should live? And where we have no clear compass, how do we navigate a notion of appearances, distractions, fears, hatred, and endless possibilities, where every choice opens a path, but also the risk of losing the way, of making mistakes? Odysseus is much more than Homer's character. He is not simply a mythical hero. He is a powerful archetype capable of generating countless literary reinterpretations across time. And this is what in literary studies we call intertextuality, perhaps one of the greatest powers of literature and myth, their ability to enter into a continuous dialogue with themselves across centuries. Every age returns to the same stories and motifs. We often speak of topoi, recurring themes, images, and conceptual spaces that literature revisits throughout history. These are places of dialogue where each generation reinterprets the past through its own perspective and values, searching in conversation with those who came before for its own direction, its own horizon. The Odyssey has generated an extraordinary amount of topoi, and the Odysseus is one of those extraordinary figures through whom this dialogue has continued for almost 3,000 years. Let me now take you on a brief journey of the literary history of Odysseus, Ulysses as he is known in Latin, with the awareness that most probably Nolan's Odyssey enters into a dialogue with many of the Ulysses who came before him. In Homer, his intelligence is exceptional. He is Polymathis of many counsels and Polytropos of many turns. He embodies resourcefulness, adaptability, resilience, the ability to survive when brute force is no longer enough, to find creative solutions where others would fail. Yet, starting from the Greek world, this figure is also ambiguous. That same intelligence that saves him also makes him deceptive, manipulative, and dangerously proud. A clear example of this is when he first outwits Polyphemus by telling him that his name is nobody. So when Odysseus blinds him and he cries out for help, the other Cyclops ask him, "Who is blinding you? Who is hurting you?" And he says, "Nobody." And so they leave him in peace, because they leave him alone because they believe that no one is attacking him. But then, when he's safe at sea, driven by the desire of glory, he reveals his name to Polyphemus. And this is perceived as hubris, the dangerous pride, the overstepping the limits set by the gods. And this brings upon him the wrath of Poseidon. And in later Greek tragedy, with authors such as Sophocles and Euripides, this darker side is even more pronounced. Then this remarkable figure with the name of Ulysses passes into Roman literature. And I'm going to share here my reminiscences from a fantastic course of Latin literature which I attended at the University of Bologna with Professor Bruna Pieri. It was about the archetype of Trojan War in Latin literature. And one of the figures that we explored was, of course, Ulysses. And I've never forgotten how the Romans perceived him. Not very well. To them, he's undoubtedly brilliant, but he's also cunning, manipulative, deceitful, calculating, opportunistic, willing to sacrifice moral principles for political necessity, basically willing to achieve his goals by almost any means. Overall, a negative figure. For a culture founded on virtus, fides, mos maiorum, the ancestral code of honor, duty, and moral integrity, Ulysses embodies a dangerous form of intelligence, intelligence detached from ethical responsibility and from the divine order itself. Virgil repeatedly calls him Dirus Ulysses, the terrible Ulysses, or Pellax Ulysses, the deceitful Ulysses. The defining example of this negative aspect is the Trojan Horse, of course. For Virgil, that extraordinary ingenuity is not sapientia, wisdom. It is dolus, cleverness employed to deceive. It stands in direct opposition to the pietas embodied by Aeneas. Ovid presents him as a master of rhetoric, capable of manipulating others through the power of speech. For example, in the contest between Ulysses and Ajax for the weapons of Achilles, Ajax has physical strength and a heroic courage, but Ulysses wins, not because he's the best, but through rhetoric and intelligence, persuading the judges through the power of his words. Seneca portrays him as a cold strategist capable of sacrificing innocent lives for reasons of state. Cicero, an advocate, interestingly deeply admires Ulysses' intelligence. He frequently cites him as a model of prudence, yet carefully distinguishes between sapientia, which is the true wisdom, and caliditas, which is the opportunistic cleverness, a distinction that Ulysses constantly forces us to confront. Taken together, these portrayals reveal that Roman literature tends to view Ulysses with profound moral suspicion. Interestingly, this ancient theme of Ulysses' moral ambiguity plays a central role in Nolan's film. We see it in his willingness to do whatever it takes, in taking Troy through deception, in his decision not to bury his dead companions for a strategic reason. When Odysseus reveals his name to Polyphemus out of pride, or in the sacrifice of Sinon, who unknowingly delivers the Trojan Horse as a gift, becoming one of the victims of Odysseus' deception. So, from the Latin world, the theme of moral ambiguity enters in this modern film, in Nolan's Odyssey. Let's continue our journey and travel to Dante's Ulysses. We are at the crossroad between the Middle Ages and the New World that was about to emerge, the rebirth, the Renaissance. And in Dante, Ulysses is condemned to hell among the fraudulent counselors. Yet at the same time, we can clearly perceive Dante's fascination with this figure. Ulysses embodies a powerful temptation, one that Dante himself knew very well, the desire for knowledge without limits. The difference is that in the Dante ultimately submits himself to the higher order of God. Dante accepts the recognition that there is something greater than human understanding, a divine wisdom that surpasses human ambition. And Dante must condemn Ulysses' foolish flight, il suo folle volo. Dante tells the story of Ulysses that is unable to remain in Ithaca when he finally gets there. Not even the sweetness of his son, nor the duty and affection owed to his aged father, nor the love that should have made Penelope happy can overcome within him the burning desire, l'ardore, to become experienced in the world and in human vices and worth. And so he declares, I set forth into the open sea, ma misi me per l'alto mare aperto, driven by hubris, by the idea that it is possible to overcome every limit. Ulysses once again sets sail beyond the pillars of Hercules and the boundaries of the known world. But according to Dante, this is a foolish flight. His ship crosses the boundaries that human beings were not meant to cross, ultimately swallowed by the sea. His journey ends in shipwreck and death. He will never return. Nolan seems to enter in dialogue with this Ulysses, Dante's Ulysses as well, with the film finale, the final departure from Ithaca and the journey westward beyond the horizon. But in a different way, we will explore this finale, the final voyage, in the next episode. Let's continue. For the Renaissance, this same man condemned by Dante for his excessive desire to know becomes a symbol of human curiosity, creativity, ingenuity. The center of the universe has shifted. Human beings, rather than gods, become the measure of their own possibilities. Yet the old question remains: does the desire to go beyond every boundary represent human greatness or human arrogance? Enlightenment and later positivism celebrate the extraordinary capacity of humans to explore, discover, become makers of their own destiny. Yet history shows us the tragic consequences of human power when it loses any sense of measure and limitation. The exhaustion of natural resources, the exploitation and forms of destructive power never experienced before are born from these tendencies. I do not think that I'm drifting away from the topic here. After all, Christopher Nolan is also the director and the author of Interstellar and of Oppenheimer, films that discuss the theme of moral responsibility of human intelligence and science. Once again, we return to the same question. What happens when human ingenuity surpasses human wisdom? What happens when human beings cross the boundaries of measure, the limits that are established by a higher order beyond human understanding? Then comes another Odysseus, one I know less intimately, but one I now feel a strong desire to explore more deeply. 1922. At a moment when industrial modernity was transforming human life and creating new forms of alienation, James Joyce publishes Ulysses. But Joyce's Ulysses is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is Leopold Bloom, an ordinary man walking through the streets of Dublin during a single day. His Odyssey does not take place across seas or mythical landscapes, but within the microscopic landscape of human consciousness, language, memory, desire, perception. With Joyce, the epic is no longer found only in extraordinary deeds, but in the infinite complexity hidden within every apparently ordinary moment. Monsters are no longer cyclops or mythical creatures. They are the illusions through which human beings construct themselves. Our desires, our fears, our identities, our need to believe in fixed versions of who we are. Through a multiplicity of perspectives, Joyce dismantles our certainties, revealing how fragile and unstable our ideas of ourselves can be. There is in this masterpiece an extraordinary attention to the smallest details of human existence. In a stream of consciousness, Joyce invites us to look beyond the surface of reality. Who are we when we look beyond the stories and identities through which we define ourselves? An ancient question that Joyce seems to bring back to the modern world. Conosces auton, know thyself. It seems to me that Joyce's Ulysses as well echoes in Nolan's film. On that beach, Calypso's beach, recalling Bloom's beach, as he begins to remember and confront the past, Nolan's hero at times seems to become an ordinary man searching for himself. Through Matt Damon's close-ups, we seem to enter his inner landscape. We become capable to listen to his silent monologue of guilt, memory, self-discovery. So I think that it is possible that all these past Odysseus have been present in some way in Nolan's imagination, that he has entered into a dialogue with these different versions of the myth in order to create his own Odysseus. And this sad What can we say about this latest version of our old friend? So I watched Nolan's film only once, and therefore I'm not proposing a complete analysis. What I would like to offer instead is a reflection on how this modern Odysseus can be interpreted symbolically as a powerful metaphorical hero for navigating our own times, as the hero searching for meaning in the 21st century. There are certainly many layers that I have not yet discovered, but in this reflection, I would like to concentrate on two conceptual nodes, two topoi, that I find particularly meaningful and that are, of course, deeply connected. The first one is the decline of civilization, and the second one is the hero's journey. We will explore the first topos, the decline of civilization, in this final part of this episode, while the hero's journey will be the central topic for the second episode. The theme of the decline of Mycenaean civilization is explicitly present in Nolan's film. Penelope and Telemachus, among others, speak of feeling threatened by the attacks of the people from the sea. They are presented as a real threat to their civilization. In the final scene, Odysseus reveals that this story will only be sung because those who know how to write will no longer exist. The implication is that humanity is approaching a period of darkness, a collapse of civilization and knowledge. The image of technologically advanced societies driven by conflict and ultimately destroying themselves is a recurring theme in literature. An example that immediately comes to my mind is Ray Bradbury with Fahrenheit 451, where after civilization has destroyed its own books, the survivors become a living memory of literature, preserving texts by heart and transmitting them orally, almost like the ancient bards who carried Mycenaean epic poetry to the next generations. And this image of the collapse of civilization and knowledge feels particularly powerful in our own historical moment at the beginning of the age of the artificial intelligence, where we are genuinely questioning what future generations might lose in terms of writing skills. But who are these people from the sea? In the film, they are described as ruthless barbarians who are not respecting the law of Zeus. And the law of Zeus, throughout the film, is often expressed through the principle of hospitality. Welcoming the stranger, even a beggar, because that stranger might actually be a disguised god. What a magnificent idea. The stranger might be a disguised god. This means refusing to arrogantly decide whose life has a value and whose does not. It means recognizing that every human being carries a potential spark of the divine. So the people from the sea seem to come from the outside, from the sea. They seem to be barbarians, non-Greeks. For the Greeks, every non-Greek was a barbarian. But then comes one of the most powerful moments of the film. After the immense Odysseus' final monologue, where he reveals his sense of guilt for what they had done in Troy, all the horrors, Penelope tells him, "You are the people from the sea." The people from the sea were not simply an external enemy. They were the Greeks themselves. Agamemnon, Odysseus, Menelaus, at the height of their power. They had not respected the law of Zeus when they entered in Troy with a trick, the Trojan Horse, and they committed horrors. What a powerful metaphor. The greatest threat to civilization may not always come from the outside. Sometimes barbarity is created by civilization itself. For example, by government strategies driven by greed, by short-term interest without considering their long-term impact. This is symbolized magnificently by Agamemnon. He is a powerful symbol of this reckless politics. Driven by realpolitik, politic detached from morality, and not simply by Helen, as the film repeatedly suggests. He moves against Troy, greedy for strategic power. And in order to conquer that strategic point, countless lives are destroyed. 10 years of war, suffering of soldiers and civilians, and before all this, the sacrifice of his little daughter. Through this lens, the people from the sea become a symbol of something much closer to us. They represent those forces in human society that are guided only by effectiveness and efficiency detached from morality. This is why in Nolan's film, Agamemnon's entrance into Troy is so significant. He appears almost like a monster without a face, enormous, covered in dark armor. Only in death he will recover his human face. These forces, these powerful people, elites that govern the world are often faceless, dehumanized. We don't even know who they are. But is Nolan's Odysseus also a ruthless utilitarian? Someone willing to sacrifice humanity in order to achieve his goals? No. And this is precisely what makes him tragic. He seems forced into this position, forced to sacrifice his own humanity in the name of political necessity. Before leaving Ithaca, he has a conversation with Penelope, where Odysseus explains clearly that he is obliged to join Agamemnon's expedition. If he refuses, Agamemnon will turn against him. And paradoxically, even though he doesn't believe in Agamemnon's war, he doesn't believe in the cause, it is Odysseus himself that brings victory through the Trojan Horse, through a form of intelligence and technology that is extremely effective, but separated from morality. He might not be a ruthless leader, but he acts like one. When in Troy, he sees the head of Athena, a goddess and a symbol of wisdom and civilization. The head of the statue and of a young priestess, destroyed and cut by the brutal logic of victory at all costs. He understands that he has participated in something barbaric, monstrous. Monsters don't only live outside, they are within us. And this is perhaps where Nolan's Odyssey becomes deeply relevant to our own time. How often do we live in societies where effectiveness and efficiency, where the so-called necessities risk becoming separated from moral responsibility? We constantly cross boundaries in the name of progress and power. We consume more resources than the planet can generate. We witness devastating wars. We experience systems in which human value is sometimes measured only according to productivity and performance. Systems in which foreigners, instead of being seen potentially as disguised gods, are turned into scapegoats for hatred, targets of dehumanization. And even beyond these global questions, perhaps smaller everyday choices reveal the same tension. Choosing success at the expense of integrity, sacrificing people for efficiency, avoiding someone because maintaining our social image matters more than human connection. These are moments in which perhaps we also risk becoming a little like Nolan's Odysseus, trapped in the logics of power, success, and performativity, in their necessity, even if we don't believe in them. And then, in time of civilizational crisis, often we see not only violence, but also moral emptiness. And this brings us to the suitors. In Ithaca, the absence of the king creates a vacuum. Every evening, the suitors feast and drink. They hope to gain Penelope's hand because they desire power, yet they display no true virtue. They indulge themselves, manipulate, and ultimately resort to violence. Contemporary psychology often distinguishes between hedonic well-being, the pursuit of pleasure, and eudaimonic well-being, the search for meaning and purpose. Symbolically, with the absence of the father king, Ithaca has lost not only its ruler, but also its moral compass. And this feels deeply relevant today. In a culture increasingly shaped by performance, appearance, immediate gratification, amplified by social media, we face important questions about meaning, belonging, well-being of younger generations. The people from the sea are not simply out there. The people from the sea are us. Or perhaps they are the parts of ourselves we must learn to recognize and overcome. If the people of the sea are also within us, if we have become the people from the sea, then another question becomes unavoidable. Is there a way back? Is there a way to recover our humanity, to find a direction, a compass, a Ithaca? And that is the question that we will explore in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and please don't hesitate to share your ideas, anything that comes to your mind in the comments.